This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com. And today my guest is a wrestler who I guess was from the generation just above me in the dungeon, was trained just before me, started off in Calgary. I think it's safe to say he's the most popular Native Canadian wrestler, Indigenous wrestler in Canada today, and has been for a while. Wavell Starr, who's also former OVW, had matches for WWE. He's wrestled all over the place, and we're going to get into that today.
Right on. How you doing? Thanks for having me on, Devin.
Good to see you again. I don't think I've seen you since the Stampede day, or maybe the WWE Extra days.
Yeah. No, I remember we saw each other at a bunch of shows at the WWE shows there for Raw and SmackDown. I specifically remember you accepting Shelton Benjamin's challenge. Remember we used to just kind of go wait around the ring and see what was up and see if we get matches and stuff. And I remember Shelton Benjamin had kind of put out an open challenge, and you had put up your hand and went in there. And I remember I told my son, my friend Devin, he did really good.
And I wasn't expecting that day. I was not expecting that at all.
Yeah, for sure.
And at that time, it seemed like they were really interested in you at that time, but it seemed like that interest kind of got cut off when they brought back Tatanka. And in my opinion, that was a huge mistake because you had more potential than Tatanka at that point, and I wish they had given you a chance. But sometimes it seems like if they have one type of ethnic group, they don't want another for whatever reason.
Yeah. No, I get that. And it's the whole thing. It's really ironic how that works, because early in my career, a lot of people had told me that maybe because of the gimmick, that had a reason why I was advancing at the pace that I was. And then when it comes right down to it in terms of trying to get ink to paper and realize my dream of becoming a WWE superstar, they weren't interested in the gimmick. So in a sense, I could say in that way, it may have held me back in that particular situation.
And you didn't have a typical Indigenous gimmick. You had a bit of a twist on it, for sure. If you want to just let people know your version of the updated Native gimmick.
I definitely tried to update it for sure. And what I noticed is that for a lot of the Native American superstars in the past, that a lot of my family and friends and stuff, like what the criticism that they would give them, and I would pay attention to what they liked and the things that they didn't really like. And I found that everybody thought that it was really cool to actually go ahead and use the gimmick or to use the character, but at the same time that people wanted to see it be a little bit more realistic and maybe not so movie-like, you know. So I did the best I could to try to make it the appearance of the character to be more modern. And as time went on, eventually got to work that role as a heel. And I think that at that point, that's where I really got to explore that character and take it to different levels.
And at least you did realize your dream in some ways. You were used quite a bit by WWE in those years. So
yeah. Yeah, for sure, man. I was lucky. There was a handful of years there where we were going out to WWE, and back then we used to get matches, you know. And it sounds like, you know, I don't pay the closest attention to what I generally keep up with what's going on, but it kind of doesn't sound like a lot of the boys are getting matches nowadays. So I think at the very least that was something that I can say that I've had several WWE matches, and that's definitely accomplishing my dream. And further to that, my dream was honestly more working the Stampede territory that's what got me into the business, like the whole independent territory days. So I got to experience that in Stampede Wrestling, and then I also got to experience it in Louisville, Kentucky, working for OVW. So those were the parts that I really liked. The WWE shows, they were awesome to do, but at the same time, you know, they're pretty stressful, right? You're going in there and you got to pay attention to how you govern yourself. Got to say hi to everybody and make sure you shake everybody's hand and all that kind of stuff. But I really like to do the territory stuff, getting in a vehicle with Bruce and heading to Drumheller and working a show and coming back. You know what I mean? And keeping that going.
And the other thing I think that's changed now is back then WCW had recently closed. It had been like only 4 or 5 years. There was a lot of talent. And now I think they give people more chances. Like a lot of the days when we were back there, we did nothing. Nobody looked at us. We just sat around. But from what I understand now, they actually take more time to actually look at the wrestlers that they're bringing in. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little bit more structured. Yeah, I remember that. A lot of the times, it was just you go there and you find out what's going on. And I was lucky that I was able to get into matches, so I was able to do stuff. But there certainly were shows where it was just a matter of showing up and just being there and trying to network and show your face and be around the monitor and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, not as cool as getting to work a match in front of the crowd for sure.
So you mentioned one of your goals was to wrestle for Stampede Wrestling, which of course you did extensively when they did their reboot. You're from Saskatchewan, for people that don't know, which is right next to Alberta. There you go. You're representing.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, Stampede actually went to Saskatchewan regularly. Did you grow up a Stampede Wrestling fan?
Absolutely. I grew up in Saskatoon, which the Stampede Wrestling went to, but it seemed to be more of a thing in Regina, here where I live now at the Exhibition Auditorium. And you bring that up to a lot of performers that actually wrestled there back in the day, and they all remember that venue. For sure. So definitely a really big thing. And that's how I got started, going to the Regina Exhibition Auditorium with my family members and then just really being fascinated and just kind of always following it throughout. And I was really big on watching, of course, the guys that came through there and made it really big in the WWF at that time, right? So there was Bret Hart and the British Bulldog and the British Bulldogs, Davey Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid. And all those guys, Jim Neidhart, they all went up, and you saw them go up through Stampede, and that was always real cool too.
What was the atmosphere like as a fan going to Stampede Wrestling in those days?
Well, I was a kid, so like it was crazy because back then it was a lot different, right? It wasn't the performance that it is now athletically, but in terms of the engagement with the crowd, I think it was a lot. It was a lot more back then. There was a lot more heat, and there was almost like that close to riot heat sometimes at the end of the night. That's what I would always remember when you'd have people like the Karachi Vice, against Bad Company or whatever, cutting promos on each other, and everybody in the building kind of crowded around the ring and pounding on the mat and stuff like that.
Were the wrestlers signing autographs and stuff in those days, or were they kind of keeping out of the way of the fans?
Well, it was a little bit more kayfabe. They weren't staying out of the way because they were on the road doing house shows, right? So they were probably kind of worn down from the grind. So you would see them kind of wandering in the back every once in a while, or going to get a coffee or watching the matches. But back then it was a little different, right? They had a heel entrance and they had a babyface entrance, and they did the best that they could to at the very least no sell each other when they were in the same location. So it is still pretty kayfabed up.
So what made you actually decide to become a pro wrestler?
My football career, I played 5 years with the Regina Rams here in the CJFL at that time before they moved over to CIAU. And my football career would come to an end. And I still felt like I really wanted to be involved in something where I was, where you really have that discipline, that daily grind, a reason to work out and all that kind of stuff. So I started watching on TV again, and that started to pique my interest. And then there was a local indie that started up at that time, and it was called Hardcore Wrestling. And really, they weren't well trained at the time, but they managed, because so many people had missed seeing Stampede Wrestling in that venue. They got a show in that venue, and they packed the place. So they were able to kind of experience a little bit of that energy. And my dad had told me about them because he went. And he told me about the show, and then I had heard that a couple of my buddies were actually involved in with that company at the time. So I just approached them, ex-bouncers and ex-football players type thing, and kind of got me hanging around. I started off by setting up chairs and working security and stuff like that. And there's a worker in Edmonton by the name of Massive Damage. And he was kind of the main local guy at that time. and I knew him. We went to the same high school, and we had some common friends. So he was the one that kind of invited me into the ring to start bumping around and get me started.
Okay, so you started training there then?
Yeah. Well, I started bumping around. I learned how to bump there. You know what I mean? Like I learned how to bump, and I learned how to run the ropes and that type of stuff there. I learned how more about psychology when I went to work on the Northern Roads tour for Tony Condello. So I got to work with Chi Cruz every day, and basically learn that style where you just go out there and just listen. And so that's really where I got that experience. And then from there, when I got on with the Hearts, I think that's where I could say that I was officially trained. So when people ask me, where I was trained, I would say that I was officially trained by Bruce.
Now, for the American fans watching this that don't know about these Tony Condello Northern Manitoba tours, could you explain to them what those are like and like how deserted that area is out there? Like you're driving for miles and miles without any towns.
Absolutely. Like we're driving across Lake Winnipeg at that time, I believe it is. And these are remote communities that are, some of them might be fly-in, where there's no access by driving, and yet you have to either use a ferry or whatever. And you're out there grinding it out, and it is just super freezing. Like we get really, really cold winters, just like in Alberta, right? In Calgary and Regina. But when you get up there, up in the north like that, that's crazy cold. And you're driving on the winter roads, which aren't like highways. So sometimes you're going as low as 40 kilometers an hour, and then you're driving across the ice. And that's not in everybody's element when you're used to driving on pavement. So we're out there in the middle of nowhere. And for myself, being Indigenous myself, I'm a Plains Cree and a Plains Dakota. So I'm used to living around here. I grew up in the city, so I'm not necessarily your typical Indigenous person that lives off the land. But I'm definitely more acclimated here than up there in the bush in northern Manitoba, and I enjoy it because as an Indigenous person, I get to meet other places, meet these people from other communities, and see how they live over there. And really, it's so different. It's so different. Like they have to get their food flown in, and everything is so expensive. You see how much it costs up there for a loaf of bread and a jug of milk, and people don't understand how isolated it is and how it affects their life. And you see, so for me as an Indigenous person, it's good and I enjoy it, but it's still kind of a grind. And I could only imagine how tough of a grind it is for someone who simply just wants to get some experience, get those matches in and move on and advance. Because you're not in hotels, you're not in airplanes, there's no airports, there's no nightclubs. There's like you get to the school during the day, you set up the ring, and you put your bags in the home ec room, because that's where we would stay, because you got all the kitchenettes, right? We'd stay there. We go to the classes, do the talks to stay in school and positive role model stuff. We would do the show. We'd tear down, cook right there in the kitchenettes. Go to sleep, and then get up in the morning and head to the next place. And you do that for, you go 2 weeks, a good 15 days.
Wow. And yeah. I imagine the pay is not in the multiple hundreds a night for those shows.
It's okay for me at this point. It wasn't in my very first year as a rookie, because you know what that pay generally is. But I mean, when you have 2 weeks worth of those, and you're a kid and you're having a great time. I tell you, on that first Northern Roads tour, there was a gap there. Tony lost the show, so there was a small gap where we didn't have a show, and he didn't want to stay out there. So we drove back to Winnipeg, and we got to stay in Winnipeg for like 2 nights. And so, got a little bit of money in your pocket, and you're wrestling, living the dream, and you're in this hotel in Winnipeg. It was great. I was having the time of my life. I had a great time working for Tony, and I still work for him here and there nowadays too.
Is he still doing those tours nowadays?
Yeah, he still is. Last that I heard, he was doing some sort of a documentary, and I think it was called like Ice Road Wrestlers or something like that. But Tony is still involved in the business, and I stay in touch with him regularly as well.
So who was it that got you hooked up with the Hearts?
Crazy Horse Eddie Mustang.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah. Do you remember Adrian Gilmore was his name, and I played football with him here on the Regina Rams, and he was a big stud wrestler for the University of Regina at the same time. So when we were done with the Rams, I started, kind of hanging around with the local promotion. He took off to Calgary and started training with Bruce at the Dungeon. And because he was a big guy and he was a legit wrestler, and he caught on, and of course he was hungry and working. You remember him; he was a hard worker.
Oh, yeah. He could have made it
for sure. Yeah. And so Bruce held his opinion in high regard. So basically, Adrian told Bruce, "Hey, I got a buddy that's been learning how to wrestle. He's got some experience," and he showed him a picture because I had all the gimmick, the boots, and all that kind of stuff. And so he put in the word. And then after that, I also had references from Bob Leonard, who's a longtime Stampede promoter who lived in Regina for a long time, and also Principal Pound. His name is John Cosman. He's another Regina worker that's been around Stampede for quite a while. So with those three on my side, I had really good references. And also a little bit of experience. And I think at the time, Bruce had some interest in bringing me in with the gimmick because he had Morris, right? He had Red Thunder, who he had been kind of pushing at Stampede. So that was kind of that's how that all got set up to start the Western Warriors tag team.
And for the fans that don't know, Stampede had been closed for about 10 years. Then wrestling had another boom with the Attitude Era. So somehow the Hearts ended up getting a TV deal again. And at the start, they started running the Pavilion again regularly too, right?
It was at the Pavilion, and the TV was on the A channel. And so they had national TV. So they were hooked right up. Lots of people were seeing this stuff. And I tell you, that was pretty cool to show up at the Pavilion. Because that was, I remember being there as a kid. My dad took me there as a little kid, and I had a cast on my arm, and Ed Whalen signed my cast. So I mean, in terms of living the dream, and I'm not the only one. Like the Hot Shot Johnny Devine was the same thing, and a lot of the boys have that same kind of a story, right?
Were you there when Hot Shot Johnny Devine and Carl LeDuc had their incident, by the way?
I did. I was not, but I recall hearing a lot about that. What exactly had happened? Anyway, I remember Carl good.
I don't know the story. I might have to ask Harry one day, but that's why I was asking. I just know that they had some type of physical altercation outside the dungeon. I think it was actually on the Hard House property or something like that.
Oh, okay. Well, I certainly don't. I don't doubt it. It's like the just how it is, right? They're wrestlers, the aggressive guys, and alpha males, and sometimes that's just what happens, right?
So when you were working for Stampede, were you commuting from Regina?
Yeah. So I would commute in from Regina, and I would stay at one of the boys' houses. Like I used to stay at Jordan Clark, Dirty Dick Raines was what his name was back then. I was also good buddies with Pistol Pollock and Ruffy, Ralph Silverstein, Aaron Schlosser from Ontario. He was at Stampede at the time, so he'd let me stay at his place as well. Also, I stayed at Crazy Horses a couple times. Like the first time I came into Calgary, and it was a nice place, and I was just so thankful that he had offered it to me. And of course, he was like I mentioned, he was my referral in. So, oh, thanks, man, I appreciate that. And we got to the house, and so I'm on a couch, and I don't mind sleeping on the couch at all. But his roommate had a pet snake, and it was in this aquarium, and it was like, like I'm on the couch and I'm looking at this pet snake in the aquarium, and I've always, it's not like I've got a phobia of snakes, but at the same time, you're kind of sleeping with one eye open, thinking like, what if that thing gets out of the starts crawling around? So after that, I ended up staying with Ruffy and some of the other boys.
There was so much great talent there at that time. All those names you mentioned.
Oh yeah.
What was your experience like with Bruce when you first met him? He's a bit of an interesting character.
Same thing as everyone else. At first he's real serious and gives you the straight business, and until you get in the system and you get to know them a little bit, and then you start to notice that these aren't blatant in your face ribs. Like you just kind of notice them kind of coming at you from the side, these like little slight ribs, right? And then you kind of get to notice it, but at the same time you realize, who cares? You know what I mean? Everybody ribs everybody, and as far as I was concerned, everyone got along. I did what I would probably mention maybe is that at that time that was a really strong local crew of guys that were living in Calgary, and these guys were Bruce's guys that were, they would be the ones setting up the rings and probably putting up flyers and posters around Calgary. And I realized, I came in from Regina, and I only get there for the TV, and I go to the dungeon on Saturday and Sunday, but I realized that now that I look back, like there was a little bit of a competitive edge, right? You're coming into a locker room where everybody else is really working hard, paying their dues. You got a room full of studs, and you're coming in. And so at first, it definitely felt a little bit. They didn't let me off easy right off the bat, but they let me in. Like eventually, just like anything else back then, right? You go through that part at the beginning, and then you get through that, and then you're all good.
And actually, a lot of people don't last through that part at the beginning of the dungeon training. Right. Anyways, it's pretty brutal. I know everyone has different experiences there, but I found like the veteran class before me wanted to take out all of the misery they went through on me. Did you have a similar experience when you first came into the dungeon? Or I know you were already an established wrestler, so it may have been a bit different than me because I think I'd only had 3 or 4 matches when I first came in.
Yeah, it was kind of like that because those workouts are hard. So you come in and the local boys that have been doing it for years, like they can go through those drills really good and they still blow up. And then you're coming in and you go in there and you're blown. I hated that drill where Bruce would go hip toss, body slam, arm drag. So you just get up, you're just taking bump after bump, you know what I mean? And there's no way to pace it. Like he goes until you're blown up. So if you try and pace it, then you're just going to go longer. So I hated that, and I remember blowing up. I remember blowing up all the time to the point where, like, at first, I get to go to the Heart Dungeon and do my training. This is awesome, and then I was like, I'm going to go there and get blown up. And if it wasn't in the ring, or sorry, in the dungeon, it was on that treadmill, right? Remember that?
Oh God, yeah, the old treadmill.
Yeah. So that's what the memories were. It was competitive, and the boys are good, and they were used to the practices, and I was getting blown up every time at the beginning for sure.
Now I remember when I was there, if there was a guy that did something really stiff, like let's say he would always slap you in the ear, Bruce would always call that. Or if like Kerwin, for instance, always drop kicked you in the balls, he would always call for that move when he was having you wrestle. Did you notice that as well? Like he would purposely try and get wrestlers to stiff each other down there?
Yeah, all the time. And I remember also backstage when Davey came back and he was the European champion, and they were going over the angle that they were going to do with the honor roll, and it was with Ralph Ruffy Silverstein, and he had that putter or whatever, and then Bruce was Davey, if you grab this putter and and just kind of right, and so he gives him one. He ends up giving him like 6 in a row, and poor Ruffy is just kind of sitting there. Yeah, make sure you really get. Yeah, so he does it like 6 times in a row, just bagging him with this putter, eh? So I remember seeing Bruce doing that kind of stuff all the time, and also the music ribs. The music ribs in the middle of nowhere. It's like that one. You're young and you're hungry and you're even though you're at some house show in some small town, you're living the dream and you want it. That music, you're waiting for your music, you're all fired up, and then something stupid comes on. So that one gets you. When you're a little bit more inexperienced in the business. After a while, I'm pretty sure you were the same way, where you probably didn't even care what you came out to, right?
No, and I also found that he would rib people on their names. Like my original name, I won't even say it on here, was terrible, but like he would purposely give people really bad names for his own amusement.
For sure, always some sort of a phallic reference.
Yeah. Now I noticed that Bruce was more sadistic in having wrestlers like stiff each other and so forth. He wouldn't actually put the holds on you. When I was there, it was very rare for Stu to come down because he was getting in his last days. I know you were there a bit before me. Was he coming down at all?
No, so Stu wasn't coming down, but I am lucky enough that after the workouts, I'd just go up and talk with Stu, and talk with Stu is willing to sit there and share information, share knowledge for as long as you're basically as long as you're willing to listen. So I definitely took advantage of that, and but as far as him coming down to the dungeon, it wasn't happening by that time.
It's too bad nobody did a shoot interview with Stu. That would have been quite something.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, but the shoot interviews weren't really around at that time, I guess.
No. Now you have a pretty good Bruce impression. Can we hear your Stu?
It's the same thing, I think. Is it not the same thing? A lot of the people that do the impression sound the same thing. Always something like that, right?
And I noticed as the brothers get older, they all start to look more like Stu and talk more like
and sound the same. Same. Yeah, especially on the phone. On the phone, for sure, yeah.
Any match that stands out from your time in Stampede that was particularly important to you, I guess?
Probably the debut one at the auditorium. In the pavilion, in Calgary. Yeah, in the pavilion, because it was like, it really was sort of a dream of mine to wrestle in that venue, and I got to be there at Stampede Wrestling, which was something that I was a huge fan of growing up, and that was my night where they bring you out, give you a little bit of steam right off the bat, and so that probably that night I would have to say.
I still haven't checked that off of my bucket list because they stopped running the pavilion by the time I was there. But one day I will bring my own wrestling company to the pavilion before I'm done promoting. And if that ever happens, we'll definitely have to have you back for that one.
Oh, I would love it, man. I would be there for sure. And there were some shows at the pavilion just a few years ago that the Heart Legacy, they were called at the time. They ran a couple of shows at that pavilion, so I got to be there for that. And
you were on that?
I was on that, and I'd have to say, honestly, probably if you're picking to go back and you think your favorite, that wasn't really a Stampede match. But it was a Stampede moment kind of for me. I was involved in the first big show that they had there, and that was the night that Gamma Singh and Abu Weezal came to the ring and inducted me into the Karachi Vice. And I had wore a headdress, a feather headdress, which was my dad's, is legit. I wore it for the angle for that night because it was such a big night. I came to the ring. Gamma called me out, and I was wearing my headdress. And then we made the announcement, and someone came and got my headdress, took it to the back, and Gamma put the turban on my head, and from that moment on, I was inducted as a member of the Karachi Vice. So to me, that was pretty cool in terms of accomplishing something that was basically kind of a fan moment, right?
It's nice to see. I'm not a big Impact Wrestling fan, but I'm glad that Gamma Singh is getting a paycheck from them.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't seen a lot. I only saw the one where he was doing the thing with the vape, and I thought that was pretty funny. And I mean, he's got a great mind for the business, and he's in good shape in terms to be a manager. He doesn't have to be in there taking bumps and stuff like that. He could probably continue doing that for quite a while.
Scott D'Amore, I believe, was wrestling in Stampede during the time you were there. Do you have any memories of how he was in those days?
He just came in. He just came in as a guest, kind of, and to check it out. And it was kind of near the end, so a lot of the stuff was in place. But in terms of the resources, money wise, at that point, things were starting to really decline. But I remember I was on one loop with them, and he came to a couple TV tapings. I know he was on one for sure. He was a nice guy. He was a nice guy to ride in the van with, and really just fire questions towards him and hear some of his experiences, because he's definitely one of those guys that has a lot of experience and lots of really good knowledge to share.
And for those that don't know, Mauro Ranallo and Bad News Allen, otherwise known as Bad News Brown, were the commentators for the rebooted Stampede show. Mauro became a WWE announcer now, and also an MMA and boxing announcer. News unfortunately passed. Any memories of those guys?
Yeah. No, I remember meeting Mauro when I first went in, and I thought it was cool because he was a legit a color commentator guy for TV, and you could tell a lot of the other indies and stuff were just using one of the boys or something like that. So it was, I thought, really good, nice to meet him. And Bad News, of course, was really cool to meet. I always remember when I was a kid, my grandma used to hate him so much, and same with the Cuban Assassin, used to just hate him. And it'd be just funny that I think now that I'm old, he was one of the nicest gentlemen that you could ever meet in the business. And he actually kind of took me under his wing in certain aspects, because during that time, kind of teaching me a little bit about how to work a race-based heel gimmick. Because of course, in his day, he would have been through all that, and he had some really good advice. And I actually remember one time as well working for Tony when I was still younger in my career, and there was a lot of seniority in terms of guys on the roster. It was a TV taping, and guys were lining up to be paid. Don Callis was the booker, so it was loaded with talent. And I was a younger guy, so I was near the back. And Bad News, when he was coming in to get his pay, he called me over and he walked me right to the front and was talking to me while because he wanted to talk to me while we were going up there. And so I always remember that, and I'm always thankful to the guidance that he provided me early in my career.
He was a really nice guy. He gets a reputation in some of these books and interviews. I guess him and Brett must not have got along very well, but any interaction I had with him he was one of the nicest people in wrestling I met.
Yeah, for sure. Always had something good to say, and not just about wrestling as well. You sit there and just talk about the world, whatever's going on, current events, politics, anything like that. Just a great guy to sit and talk to.
Now, you eventually ended up going to Ohio Valley Wrestling. I think that was based off of a camp that you attended, right?
Yeah, so that was just basically they put out a cold call. I remember there was a tryout camp, WWE tryout camp that was managed through Ohio Valley Wrestling, and I saw the link. I don't know how I saw it. Someone made me aware of it or whatever. So I filled out a profile and submitted to that, and eventually got lucky enough to be one of the people that was picked for that camp. So there was a fee to the camp. I think the camp was $1,000 American, but I believe it included like your hotel room. Like you put us up in the Holiday Inn for the week, and it was a really good. It was the best experience, the best thing I ever did for my career in terms of professional development. I was able to, at the time, a lot of people were criticizing and saying, "Oh, Wavell, you're marking out if you're going to pay $1,000." You probably heard people saying that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
But I went around and I was able to find sponsorship to cover that. I promoted it to some of the local First Nations entrepreneurs, and one of them, "Hey, that's a great idea. Go, I'll pay your entry fee," and so. Your registration fee. So I was able to get in that. I went down to the camp, and I don't remember how many people were there, but I know that there was a handful of people that were invited back to go with full time with OVW.
So what was that experience like, moving out to Louisville from Saskatchewan? Different culture.
For sure, man. For sure. Oh, there's lots. And just to think back about, just a typical Saskatchewan boy heading down there. And I had actually gotten married I went down there with my fiance at the time, who's now my ex-wife. We went down there I think it was September, beginning of September, and we went down there, and I was part of the program until the wedding, which was in early October. So drove back from Louisville to Regina, got married. The day after the wedding, we head back and stayed in Louisville, and I learned so much during that time. It was life-changing in terms of but I guess learning more about the business. Like, you realize how much the little things, how much those things make a difference, and also just to learn, just to really be a hard worker. Like this is that's full tilt over there. And I remember thinking, wow, these guys are like wrestling machines. And that's what I remember thinking that when I went to the camp, because just the lifestyle that they live, because they're going to wrestling school, the class every day. All of them were in good shape, so everybody was eating healthy. Everybody was in the gym, and it was when I was there. I also remember it's like healthy competition. You know what I mean? Like, you're in this small group of people that are ultra dedicated, and you can't help but to benefit from being around that energy. And it's really hard outside of that, when you're on your own to do that individually, to find that same discipline. It's a little harder.
Yeah, because on the independent scene, for those that don't know, maybe a handful of guys on every independent show have that mentality. The rest are weekend warriors.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. That's exactly how it is. So that whole experience in Louisville was really life changing, and really when I think back to any part of my life where I was like really focused, engaged, and dedicated, focused to what I was doing, it started with OVW for sure.
And I understand that Jim Cornette actually took a liking to you and gave you a push, even though you weren't a developmental wrestler at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got brought down there by Jimmy, and you go down there, and for the most part, but that's a really big program, right? So even people that had experience, they would have to go to what they called the amateur class at that time, and then would have to show up at the house shows and the TVs to help set up and be there and sit in the audience and stuff like that. But I went, I was lucky enough that Jimmy liked me. And I remember there the first day, just like anybody else, you're the new guy, and everyone just kind of looks at you like you're the new guy, and they're nice to you and polite, but you're just the new guy, right? And but all of a sudden I'm on TV that night. Oh, you got a TV match? Yeah, okay, cool. But it wasn't a TV match. They called it a dark match, but Jimmy recorded it in case he was going to use it. He didn't use it because it wasn't good enough. So I was on that. So as soon as I got there, I was only there a couple days, and I was put on the card, and people saw me go out there, and I don't think they expected, because I was working with Rene Dupree, and Rennie was tag champ at the time. The Resistance was riding high, man. They were getting that big push, and Rennie was in Louisville, and worked with me, and he put me over. Like, hit him with my finisher, 1, 2, 3, and got backstage and in the locker room backstage, and right away you could kind of feel a little bit of that vibe, right? Because people could see that Jimmy had a special interest in trying to make it work, and I was not a contract guy, but I was lucky enough to be on TV in a prominent role right away, and I just started learning. Couldn't help but learn from all of those people that they had in place at the time.
Now, you're a friendlier person than I am overall. I'm not as much of a people person as you are. But when I was in Deep South, I did the same thing as you. And I found that the contract guys treated me overall like shit because I didn't have a contract. I always heard that OVW had a better backstage atmosphere and a better vibe to it than Deep South, which was one of the reasons they shut it down. But did you notice that some of the contract guys looked at you like a lesser person because you weren't under contract?
I don't think so. After maybe at first, and maybe it'd be hard not to. But after a while, when people see that you're there, and see, a lot of guys recognize that I did have talent. And so, so a lot of people would come up to me on the side and say that, don't worry about it, keep working, you're going to get a job, things are going to happen for you. So, it was definitely a different dynamic, but I didn't feel that I was really shunned, other than just your natural screening process. of letting guys talent into the network, right?
Did you witness any of Jim Cornette's infamous temper tantrums?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. Not as bad. I wasn't there, but when the thing happened with Santino, I wasn't there for that. But just in general, when something pisses him off, like he's very animated. So he's always like that. And I remember one time I showed up. I had this a TV match with Mark Magnus. That's Muhammad Hassan. So so we had a TV match, and they were getting him ready to go up, and Jimmy was giving me the push. So we went out there and we had 2 segments to do a number 1 contenders match or something like that. And so to me, it was like biggest thing I've ever been involved in, like having to remember all that. And I thought I did okay, because there was lots to remember, lots to navigate through. And I remember on the next day when I showed up at the building, I can't remember his name right now, but the ref, he comes up, "Chief, this is from Jimmy," and he had an envelope, with a letter in it, and I opened up the letter, and it was a letter from Jimmy, and it said, and it was an official letter on the OVW letterhead, just saying he wants to meet with us on that Saturday or Sunday, like it was a day off, Jimmy's day off. And he wanted us to come in on that Saturday or Sunday. He came in specifically on his day off to show us like why our match was the shits, and I totally appreciated it. It's like and it really makes that light turn on, like how much there is to learn about the business. Like I went out there and I tried my best, and I came back and I thought it was okay. I knew that there's always stuff you could do better, but as I got that letter and had to go to that meeting, and really found out that there's so many little things that I could have done better. And I'm thankful for that experience, because obviously if Jimmy doesn't give a shit, he's not going to say anything. Hey, good match, you know what I mean? And but the fact that he came in on his day off and he had notes prepared and think the match all queued up and stuff like that at points that he wanted to point out, that was really something else.
Now, what led to you leaving OVW? Was it just because you ran out of money?
Yeah. Resources things. And well, so at first we came out there, and the wife at the time, she stayed until Christmas break, and then when we went back for Christmas break, she had decided that she was going to stay back in Regina and work, and then I'll do that first, because of course you don't think you're not trying to go to Louisville forever, right? You're just trying to get there and get a job, and hopefully it's temporary. So that was the plan, is so it'll be cheaper, and we can maintain that for a while. So basically did that for as long as I could, and kind of got to that point where just one day. It wasn't just one day. It's like, okay, you see the end coming, and you have to kind of start preparing for that next step. So I do remember when I came home, and that was a tough drive. That was a tough drive, leaving Louisville for sure. But hey, man, things happen for a reason. And when I came back from there, that's when I started getting booked for the WWE shows. So things actually kind of picked up from there. So,
what was Jim Cornette's reaction? I'm sure he understood you weren't under contract, you have to earn a living. Was he just sorry to see you go, or did he say anything to you?
Yeah, but he booked an angle that would kind of leave it open. So what happened? So Brett Albright was the one that we gave the rub to. He was newer there, and I think I'd gotten stretchered out, and he tipped the stretcher, something like that. I'd have to go back and check it. But but so basically, Jimmy put an angle in it, and then if I was the original intent was, okay, I'm hoping to be able to come back at some point. But in my mind, it was like I'm hoping my phone will ring and they'll say we've got a contract for you and please report to Louisville. So but that just never happened. That's okay.
Who was the most famous wrestler that you worked with down there that went on to the WWE?
There was a whole bunch of them. I'd probably just have to just list them off and figure out who it was, because at the time, let's see who all went. I was good buddies with Carlito. He was one of the first people that was real nice to me. He lived in the same place. Joey Mercury was also a good friend. In terms of big stars, Muhammad Hassan, I think, kind of was it didn't last. It didn't last, but he got a hell of a push. John Morrison, who's back. He worked the WrestleMania. Who else was in there back at the time? Matt Morgan, Nathan Jones, Heidenreich was there, and Luther Reigns. Kind of all that whole crew of guys. And on my very first day at class at OVW, when I first got there, that was a guest day, and they had Cena in there as a guest trainer. And they had Bill DeMott as well as a guest trainer. So that day was like it was super intense. I guess it was more intense than usual. And like the part with Bill, really bagged him. And I remember telling the boys, "Holy man, I don't know how you guys do this." And it's not always like this. He said that today was a different practice. It was extra intense because of that. So the practices weren't like the practices were hard, but they weren't always quite that as hard as they were my very first day.
So I was there pretty much for all the extra jobs you had. You want to just talk about the matches you had that were on TV? I'm sure some of them are still online if people want to look them up.
The very first one was with Grandmaster Sexay. Wasn't very good.
I remember that one.
The match itself wasn't very good, but I mean, as a rookie in that situation, like I mean, in terms of rookie, I don't know how many years I had in, but in terms of being the rookie to the locker room, right? So you're the extra, you're working with an established WWE star. You don't have a lot of clout in terms of the pre-planning of what's going on. But from my experience learning from Rip Rogers and Nick Dinsmore and Rob Conway and Jim Cornette, the match, they would if they would have looked at that match, they wouldn't liked it. I knew that going into it, but at the same time, I knew politically there's that's the spot. So just go out there and do the match. I think the performance was okay, but basically it was really cool to say that was my first WWE match. My dad was there, and it was in Calgary, so that was kind of special. But other than that, I think
it was packed that night too. From what I remember, the arena was full.
Yeah, for sure. It was something else.
How was he behind the scenes, Brian Christopher? Because he has that reputation.
Well, he wasn't an asshole to me. He wasn't an asshole to me or anything like that. But I mean, at the same time, there's a food order there, like a pecking order, I guess, right? So he put the match together, and that was that. So, but it's not like he went out of his way to be a jerk to me or anything like that. It was just that's what it was. Oh, and one of the coolest ones probably was when they did Raw and SmackDown at the Winnipeg Arena right before that. That was the last time they put it there, because that arena has a lot of wrestling legacy, wrestling history there, right, with the old AWA crowds. And when we were there, I worked the opening match on the first day as a heel with Nova, Simon Dean. And then I worked the opening dark match on the second day, SmackDown, with Carlito.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I got to work both days, opening matches. One day as a babyface, one day as a heel, and so that experience was pretty cool for me. And I remember when I was telling, have you ever met Rick Patterson? He used to be an old Stampede guy, and he went on to Japan with the Leatherface gimmick.
I know who he is.
Yeah, we were on the road one time, and I told him that story. I said, "Hey, man, I got to wrestle at the Winnipeg Arena," and he popped, his ears kind of perked up, and then he asked me. I told him about the story, and at the end of the story, he was like, "Wow, man, good for you. I'm so proud of you." And you could see like there was a tear coming out of his eye. So for people that were in and around Winnipeg, you see how special of a night that is. So looking back on that, I really appreciate that.
Winnipeg is probably the #1 wrestling city in Canada right now. As far as some of the top wrestlers are from there, we have Omega, Jericho, Callis, and D'Amore running Impact. But they just had a huge crowd for a Raw taping there, and we know WWE's not really packing it for Raw tapings these days. So,
yeah, for sure, Winnipeg definitely a big wrestling town right now.
How is the wrestling environment these days in Saskatchewan? I know WWE still comes there.
It's pretty good. When WWE comes, they get good crowds, and it's still really popular. In terms of the independent shows, it varies, right? It depends on who's. Depends on where the venue is, and what day it is, and that type of thing. But independent wrestling can draw a fair decent crowd, depending on who they bring. And WWE for sure still strong, but most definitely as for people my age and up in Regina where I live, just any reference to Stampede Wrestling, like right away they come around and they have all sorts of questions, because the whole legacy of Stampede Wrestling is really huge around here for sure.
Did you ever have much interaction with the British Bulldog when he was backstage at the various Stampede shows?
I only met him a few times there at Stampede. Like he was making his run with WWF again. And he came to a couple shows. He worked a couple shows, so I met him there. And actually, that's good that you bring that up. So I remember after my first show, Davey was there, and after that, everybody was going to Earl's. So meet you guys all at Earl's. I was by myself, right? Because I drove in by myself, so I just pulled up to Earl's and went into the front there. And it was a Friday night in Calgary in Earl's. It's packed. It's happening. And when I walked in, I happened to walk in the same time as Davey. And hey, and so I just kind of walked in behind Davey, and I tell you, every head in that place was just like that, and people would like openly talking about him as, hey, look, it's Davey Boy Smith. Hey, look, it's a British Bulldog, and I remember thinking like, holy man, this must be like what is it, like Elvis Presley, he was just so you could feel that the energy, that how over he was,
Now, have you been following Harry's career? He's doing pretty good. He's taken over the British Bulldog name.
Yeah. I've been seeing a little bit on social media. It looks like a physical specimen right now. You can see in terms of his training that he does. He doesn't just do the bro splits and the bench presses. He's doing a lot of conditioning stuff. So probably lots of really good stuff to come out of Harry in the next little while. And I always remember in the dungeon, because Harry was around there, and so was TJ. TJ Wilson at that time, and sometimes they would wrestle on some of the house shows, or they'd come around and stuff like that. And I remember just thinking, wow, these kids are going to be really good when they get when they get out of high school, because at that time they were just kids, right?
Yeah, I think Harry is the best technical wrestler in the world, to be perfectly honest. With the amount he trains and all the shoot holds he trains, and he can move so well for his size. I don't think too many people could beat him in a shoot, if any, these days, out of pro wrestlers anyways.
No, I don't think so as well. You can tell that he takes that very serious.
Now, Ted is another one that when we were younger, he looked like he was going to be definitely one of the top WWE stars, but unfortunately, that's not the path that happened. What do you think about his career and all his latest news?
Well, it's unfortunate because he has all the talent in the world. Ted has all the talent in the world, and really, if he could, find some discipline himself to be able to work as a company man, and at that level, because really that's what it comes down to, right? WWE is a large corporation, and you have to, in order to function at that level, you got to know how to govern yourself as part of the team, and that's hard for some people to do. And I think he was the youngest person to ever get signed. And back then he was probably too young. He's probably too young to be if he would have got the opportunity back there. But I think maybe within this past 6-7 years, there probably could have been a really good run there if there wasn't some of those other issues that he was running into.
Now, I've seen your videos. You're doing home workouts now with this virus causing the gyms to be shut down. I've heard that Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick are pretty clear of the situation compared to other provinces. Can you see things opening up there soon?
They're already starting to talk about transitioning back and slowly opening things up. So you've got a couple of different reactions. You've got a bunch of people you've got a bunch of people that are really paranoid about it, saying no, it's too soon. There could be a second wave. If we do it, then this could be costing us more time overall. Then you've also got a group of people that are kind of to the mindset of the economy. If the longer we wait, then there's not going to be an economy to come back to if we don't start making some measures to slowly get back to normal, whatever the new normal is after all of this. But I think the fact that they're at the point where they can at least discuss it, because statistically things look like they may be going to where we need them to go, then I think that's a good thing.
Now, when I was wrestling for Stampede, sometimes we would do these native reserve shows, and some of these reserves, it seemed like the quality of life is pretty low. I'm sure you did shows like that as like an Indigenous person. How do you feel when you go on some of these reserves and you see how things are?
Well, a thing that you can I guess compare to some of the reserves that would be more destitute compared to the ones that are flourishing. I guess it depends a lot. Well, part of it would be geographical location, but a part of it would also have to be in terms of leadership within the community. And for instance, my mother is a band member at the Whitecap Dakota First Nation near Saskatoon. And I remember when I was a kid, it was a small reserve. I remember walking on the gravel roads, and it was just pretty small, nothing fancy at all, And when Chief Darcy Bear got in, he had background in economic development. He opened up a casino, he opened up a golf course and a resort. Now a hotel on its way, and that community now has the lowest unemployment rate of any reserve in Canada, and their roads are all paved. And basically anybody wants to work, they can work at the casino, they can work at whatever it is. So you see that some places that have that type of strong leadership that were able to do that, and then you see some other nations that maybe aren't able to get to that same level, and it's unfortunate. But definitely we're at a point in time right now where this next generation has really picked up on education. And also more and more engaged in finding ways to be economically self-sufficient. I think right now a lot of the young people are saying we need to get away from administering poverty to going out and doing these economic development projects that are going to really give back and help the community and elevate it and take it to that next level.
I was on a reserve in Quebec not too long ago, and it wasn't that big of a reservation, but there was about 10 different pot shops. I guess now that Canada is legal for marijuana, that reserve in particular was really into it business-wise. Is it like that in Saskatchewan and on the west coast of Canada too, or depends on the reserve?
Yeah, the cannabis business right now, ever since it's been legalized, of course, is kind of blown right up, and a lot of the First Nations here in Saskatchewan are doing the same thing. I think where the issues are going to come is that there was very strict regulations when they first came about, and those regulations have been relaxed considerably. So basically, it's an open market to anybody that wants to get in that cannabis game. And I think obviously the more people you have in there, the less profit there is going to be to go around. So I think there's a few people that got in on it right at the beginning, and they're probably going to do really well. But I don't know how profitable it'll be now that it's kind of blown wide open.
And the last guy I'll ask you about is someone we've used up here in Great North Wrestling a few times, Senator Patrick Brazo, who's a very high-profile Indigenous politician here in Canada. He's still a senator. What are your thoughts on him and his transformation in recent years?
Well, I watched those interviews that you posted. I was probably one of the people that was more interested in that than a lot of the other viewers, because I followed a lot of that. And thinking back to a really tough time in Canadian history during that whole Idle No More period, where there was a lot of tensions between Indigenous people in Canada and the government. And he was in that. He was a heel. He was the heel of that situation, kind of what it was. They had him speaking on behalf. Sorry, he was speaking on behalf of the government because he was in that position, but which happened happened to be adversarial to what a lot of the Indigenous people were believing in, and I guess there's always been a lot of tension between the government and Indigenous people in general, but for the people that follow politics, there's probably even more between the conservatives and the Indigenous people, just because of the way things were right now, because it was the conservative government at the time that when all the tensions were high. So he was in a really tough spot. And in a sense, I can sort of understand to a certain degree what it's like to be in that position where your own people might be calling you an apple or a traitor. So I understand what it's like to be in that kind of a spot. There's, I sympathize with them to a certain extent. At the same time, very tough game to get into, because a lot of our politicians aren't politicians, they're leaders. And a lot of them are going to do whatever they can to protect the ways and the culture of their people. So a lot of tension there for sure. And I kept up with that. And I couldn't believe it that you were able to get him on a wrestling show. And I remember I was writing a column for a local Treaty 4 News. I was writing a column for Treaty 4 News, and I saw the interview on your page, and I sent it to the editor, and I said, we need to go here. Like, we need to go here. So I was thinking about it and seeing if there was a way that we could kind of somehow get in there, because I think there's a natural, all sorts of angles there, and we were thinking about that. We just never were able to follow through.
Yeah, you guys should get him out there for a wrestling event one day. He's a huge wrestling fan, and he can take a beating too. I could tell you, he can take a beating better than some wrestlers.
I bet. I saw that you put him through a table and stuff like that when you guys went out there, and definitely an interesting fellow.
So where can people follow you if they want to look you up on social media?
I got a YouTube channel, which I just now started, basically because into other stuff. Because of my job that I'm involved in and my roles that I fill within the community, it's not all wrestling content. There's a lot of stuff that's current events and a lot of stuff that's current to the Indigenous community that I do there. But I have an Instagram at there, Wavell Starr. Same with the Twitter at Wavell Starr, and Facebook. I still use Facebook.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people that still keep Facebook as their main social media. I still haven't really figured out the other ones other than YouTube, I guess.
Right. I've got enough. Like the ones that I have with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. I feel like I have enough, and I wouldn't want to open up a whole bunch of other ones that I don't have time to manage properly.
Yeah.
So.
I think TikTok's the new one that people are doing lip syncing on. Maybe you can. You've done some musical stuff in Indigenous music, right? I've seen some of your clips.
Yeah, I used to be a powwow singer. I guess earlier on, right around the time when I was doing Stampede Wrestling, it was kind of right the tail end of my competitive powwow singing at that time. My son, Cage Starr, he's 15 years old, and he's been around drumming all of his life, and right now he's the one that's taken that over.
He's also a pretty serious hockey player, isn't he?
Yeah. He's a serious athlete. He loves sports. He's grown up around the locker room, I guess, and just likes the locker room culture, and just really loves to be part of the hockey, part of the team, and being part of sports. I'm hoping that I can convince him to sometime get involved in football and maybe pro wrestling, but at the same time, it's up to him. Hands off. If he wants to, it's hockey, baseball, or not even a sport. It's up to him, right?
Yeah. So what wrestling company are you wrestling for now mostly? Is there a Saskatchewan-based one where you take most of your bookings?
Well, I was working with High Impact Wrestling at the time, right when right before they went out of business. But there's another company as well called Ringside Wrestling in Regina. And generally, I don't wrestle like a lot in Regina, but when I do, I sort of just grab a cluster of maybe 3 or 4 shows from each company at a time. So they know, we can have a little idea. We come in with an idea, do an angle, and blow it off, and then I'm gone. And they're okay with me going back and forth. And it's not like it's the 1 week after I come in at one company for 4 or 5 shows in a row and then not wrestle in Regina for 4 or 5 months or whatever it is. I like to wrestle in Alberta. I still work for Squigs. Do you remember Squigs?
Yes.
Steve.
Yeah.
Steve is running RCW, and over the years he's really built that up to the point where they're doing Calgary and Edmonton twice a month each. So
wow.
Yeah. So
yeah,
he does Calgary twice and he does Edmonton twice. So he's got the back-to-back every second weekend. So I like working for Steve, and a lot of that is because I like to drive to Alberta and see people. I got lots of friends in Alberta, and I enjoy being in Edmonton and Calgary as well.
And last question, for those that don't know, I've driven it numerous times, but the Regina to Calgary trip, there's been a lot of accidents over the years, a lot of people falling asleep. It's basically a straight stretch of road, almost very boring drive. What's the biggest nightmare story you've had making that trip over the years?
So one time I was working for Squig at RCW, and he had really good hotels. I think it was a Nova Suites or something like that in Calgary downtown. Beautiful. So it was a great time every time we do Calgary, and then sorry, we had to get a different hotel, but this one's good. And I went to it, and it was just it was terrible. It was terrible, and I'm not going to get mad or get hot or anything like that. It's okay, cool. So I worked the show and hung out with friends for a bit, and then got back to the hotel, and then just wasn't really feeling it, and I was like, I'm awake. I feel good. I'll just get some coffee. I'm going to take some ephedrine and hit the road, and I'll be good, right? And so I was great. I was good. I'll be home by noon. I can do stuff during the day or whatever. So that was my idea. And then I didn't even make it to Strathmore. And I remember I was driving, and then Brandon BVD from Calgary, he was in the locker room. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, BVD was in the locker room tonight. And then all of a sudden it was just, I felt this boop, 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 boop. And I snapped out of it, and I looked, and I was driving in the ditch. So I was like, I didn't stop. I woke up and I was driving like 100 kilometers an hour or whatever in the ditch. So lucky I didn't hit anything in the ditch or a sign or anything. I snapped out of it, and I looked, and I slowly got back onto the highway, and I was so freaked out, man. Because that's something different, man. Like you used to doing the road trips, you stay up all night, like you do it all the time, right? You do it all the time, and just out of the blue, it just hit me, and I wasn't even doing the head bobs. Like, sometimes you do the head bobs, you're like, wow, I'm getting tired. It's just all of a sudden, boom, just like that. And so that was scary. That was one of my toughest ones for sure. And it's because that drive is just straight plain.
I made the mistake of running out of gas on that route, because for those that don't know, there's not a lot of gas stations open past midnight.
Right.
And yeah, you want to fill up before you leave.
You got to. So that's the thing. You got to get gas in every city. Just stop and get gas. Danny Duggan, you've interviewed Danny Duggan on here before. He's done. One time he told me he ran out of gas in between, like going from Winnipeg to Calgary or somewhere, and it was like, dude, there's gas like every 45 minutes. Just pull over. Don't wait until you got an empty tank. Just pull over in the cities and fill up. But hey, but you got to go, right? Like you got to get there. You got to get there.
So any final message to close this off? Thanks a lot for joining us and sharing some of your stories. I'm sure the Stampede Wrestling fans are really going to appreciate them.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me on the show, Devin. I've been watching it lately, and I see you got so much. So you got a great audience following you right now. So I really appreciate the exposure. It's nice to get out here and talk about wrestling. A lot of the times I spend talking about other stuff that I'm doing in life. So, but wrestling is still something that I'm very much attached to. So thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Let's get a promo of you to close this off. Whoever you want from the current roster of WWE, could you close this off?
No, I won't be cutting a promo on anybody on the roster. I've already done all that stuff before.
Well, cut one on me. Cut one on me.
Welcome to the Wavell Starr Show. I'm your host, the First Nation sensation, the featured presentation, every woman's infatuation, God's greatest creation, Wavell, the stud of the stable. Star, and you're watching Hannibal TV.
Good, I got it.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.